Breaking news. Menka massacres, Mandela Center submits compromising evidence to the ICJ. That these remarks were confirmed on May 29, 2018, at a press conference, by the Minister of Communication and Government spokesperson, Isachirama Bakery, warning the Cameroonians that it should be waiting to see other scenes horrible like those of Menka. That no information has filtered about the circumstances of the horrors committed, while the bodies found in groves and houses were without any weapons, just as no wounded was registered in the ranks of the army, and the alleged seized weapons by the Cameroonian army have never been unveiled. Below, the entire communiqué of the Cameroonian NGO reached our editorial staff. She called for the establishment of an international commission of inquiry to investigate the Menka massacres that occurred on May 25. Images of corpses lying in pools of blood, bodies riddled with bullets, men hanging from the ceiling like animals in a butchery, remains piled in the bush, have traveled around the world as a result of carnage operated by the Cameroonian army, in the middle of the night from 24 to May 25, 2018, at Menkapignan village, Commune de Santa, Department of Mazam, in northwest Cameroon. That the gruesome record of this massive and barbarous massacre reports at least 32 deaths among young people who were in a small motel called Star Hotel. That the only survivor, wounded in the mouth and taken to a nearby health center by his two brothers on a motorcycle, was immediately overtaken by the army, who removed them from the hospital bed before to cut them coldly, to erase all traces. That in an outing on social networks, Colonel Didier Badjek, head of the communication division at the Ministry of Defense and spokesman of the Cameroonian army, has fully assumed the responsibility of the Cameroonian government. Forces of defense and security have thus progressed early in the morning of this day as to surround the hotel. At the end of the fighting for the benefit of the regular forces, several terrorists were neutralized, and the wounded were immediately taken care of. That these remarks were confirmed on May 29, 2018, at a press conference, by the Minister of Communication and Government spokesperson, Isachirama Bakery, warning the Cameroonians that it should be waiting to see other scenes horrible like those of Menka. That no information has filtered about the circumstances of the horrors committed, while the bodies found in groves and houses were without any weapons, just as no wounded was registered in the ranks of the army, and the alleged weapons seized by the Cameroonian army have never been unveiled. That several contradictory versions pollute the atmosphere on this dramatic event and aggravate the fracture between the Cameroonians. That the main leader of the Cameroonian opposition, N.I. John Frundi, speaks of summary executions attributed to the Cameroonian army by saying, "If I was young, I would have been in the bush fighting with others," and that Paul Biya must be prosecuted for crimes against humanity, on France 24, demonstrates the depth of trauma and suffering in English-speaking areas. That nothing in international law justifies the conduct of the Cameroonian public authorities, their armies, and their representatives in this dirty war, that the Cameroonian army had in front of civilians, secessionists, terrorists, or bandits. That since the outbreak of the Anglophone crisis in October 2016, no national inquiry has been completed and no elements of the Cameroonian defense and security forces have been prosecuted despite the multiple recorded war crimes. That only an international commission of inquiry will be able to clarify the circumstances and establish the responsibilities in a very short time. That these are serious violations of human rights within the meaning of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, UDHR, of 1948, the International Covenant on Civil Rights and Policies, ICPER, of 1966, the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, ICPER, of 1981, the Convention of the United Nations Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman, or Degrading Treatment or Punishment, CCT, of December 10, 1984, all ratified by Cameroon. That according to the international law of the rights of man, the state of Cameroon has the obligation to respect and enforce the right to life, UDHR, ICPR, that in the light of its international commitments, the Cameroonian government has an absolute obligation to prevent the extrajudicial execution of civilians, including suspected criminals, whether by the police or other security forces, to appeal to its security forces to ensure that the population living in the English-speaking areas is not murdered by non-state agents such as armed gangs, to open an investigation into those responsible for unlawful killings and to bring them to justice, that these facts constitute the war crimes and crimes against humanity recorded in the Geneva Convention, the founding act of the International Criminal Court. Articles 7 and 8. Judges of the International Criminal Court that the Cameroonian state has an absolute obligation to comply scrupulously with international humanitarian law, IHL, or the law of war, a legal framework common to the 04 Geneva Conventions of 1949 and the two additional protocols from 1977, that Cameroon has indeed ratified the Convention on the non-applicability of statutory limits to crimes of war and crimes against humanity, that the Republic of Cameroon is, indeed, party to the ICPR, to the 4 Geneva Conventions of 1949 and to the second additional protocol to these conventions relating to the protection of the victims of non-international armed conflicts, additional protocol 2, and to respond all the human rights violations attributed to it, that all Cameroonian soldiers must be instructed solely to obey the prescriptions of international humanitarian law and human rights and to disobey mandatory orders, under pain of prosecution. That all the Cameroonian military leaders involved in these abuses must answer in the light of several jurisprudence which makes criminally responsible for crimes committed by subordinates placed under its effective authority and control, when it has not exercised the control which was appropriate for such subordinates in cases where, the superior knew that these subordinates were committing or were about to commit those crimes or deliberately neglected to take into account information that clearly indicated it. 2. These crimes were related to activities within his effective responsibility and control, and 3. The superior did not take all necessary and reasonable measures within his power to prevent or punish their execution, or to refer to the competent authorities for investigation and prosecution, reinforced by Article 28 of the International Criminal Court on the responsibility of military and other leaders. In view of all the foregoing, Mandela Center International, 1. Regrets sincerely that the Cameroonian government has failed in its international commitments to expedite an urgent and effective investigation into all allegations of human rights abuses with regard to its security forces. 2. Exercises, with firmness, the Cameroonian state compensation and compensation fairly and adequately for all the victims. 3. Calls for an urgent appeal to the Security Council, the General Assembly and the Human Rights Council to set up an independent international commission of inquiry to respond to serious violations of international humanitarian law and human rights law and put an end to impunity in Cameroon. Done at Yaoundé, on June 11, 2018. The Permanent Executive Secretary. Breaking news. Menka Massacres, Mandela Center submits compromising evidence to the ICJ. That these remarks were confirmed on May 29, 2018, at a press conference, by the Minister of Communication.